C'est l'histoire d'un homme qui tombe d'un immeuble de 50 étages. Le mec, au fur et à mesure de sa chute, il se répète sans cesse pour se rassurer. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Mais l'important, c'est pas la chute. C'est l'atterrissage.
Haine, translated as Hate, is not just a film about three young men in the suburbs of Paris. It is a portrayal of the societal decay and racial tensions that fester in modern urban environments. Directed by Mathieu Kassovitz, Haine premiered in 1995, but its themes remain as relevant today as they were during the racial unrest and police brutality of early 1990s France. Kassovitz's film was a response to the systemic failures he saw all around him, failures that led to violence, hopelessness, and a mutual hatred between the police and marginalized communities in the French banlieues. The famous line at the beginning of the film, "It's not how you fall, it's how you land," is emblematic of the entire film's narrative. Kassovitz uses this metaphor to depict a society spiraling downward, unsure of when or how it will crash, but certain that the eventual landing will be devastating. The opening scene shows footage of the riots in the Parisian suburbs, followed by the tragic metaphor of a man falling from a building. This fall is not just literal, but symbolic, a depiction of French society's uncontrolled descent towards chaos and societal fragmentation. To fully grasp the impact of Haine, one must first understand the socio-political landscapes of France during the 1990s. France was a country grappling with the consequences of decades of colonialism, immigration, and economic stagnation in its working-class suburbs. The banlieues, which once housed France's booming post-war industrial workforce, had by the 1990s become hotbeds of poverty, crime, and civil unrest. A significant proportion of the population in these areas was composed of immigrants and their descendants, particularly from North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, who were grappling with the dual burdens of economic hardship and racial discrimination. The police were viewed not as protectors, but as agents of oppression. Tensions between law enforcement and these marginalized communities frequently boiled over into violence, with riots becoming a common form of resistance. One of the most shocking and significant events of this period was the 1993 killing of Magnum shot at point-blank range by a police officer while in custody. This incident directly inspired Kassovitz to begin writing Haine, as it represented the culmination of years of police violence and the pent-up frustration of a neglected underclass. At the heart of Haine are three young men, Vince, Hubert, and Said, who embody the hopelessness, anger, and disillusionment of life in the banlieue. Each one of these characters reflects a different response to the social and racial oppression they face daily. Through them, Kassovitz explores the complex dynamics of identity, masculinity, and survival in a hostile world. But now let's meet our protagonists. Vince, played by Vincent Cassel, is a young Jewish guy living in the banlieues of Paris, characterized by his multifacetism, anger, and frustration towards the situation. A Jew in the suburbs of Paris. But there's also another layer of alienation that he feels from being in an Afro-French dominated community. Vince stands out, yet he is equally marginalized by mainstream French society. This is a duality in his identity that is crucial to his character and to the story. I think his explosive and destructive nature is well portrayed by an earlier scene, where we can find him staring into his bathroom mirror, reciting the monologue of Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. Yeah, I think that tells you a lot you need to know about him, honestly. Hubert, portrayed by Hubert Condé, an Afro-French boxer and small-time drug dealer. He is by far the most introspective and mature member of the trio. He vows for finding a way out of the ghettos and encourages resilience and hope for a better life. Vince and Hubert are in a way polar opposites. They have similar traits but with different applications. One is a destructive and violent individual, the other a compassionate and sort of stoic personality. But both are uncaring. Vince towards the consequences that his volatile impulses may bring, and Hubert has an uncaringness, but it feels as if it's more towards the state of his community and not really caring for people who face injustice outside of his circle. One has too much of a backbone and the other has none. Said, portrayed by Said, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that name, is a young North African Muslim and in my opinion the most important figure in the friend group, balancing the contrasting personalities. Said often acts as the mediator between his two friends, Vince and Hubert. He uses humor and diplomacy to diffuse tensions and prevent conflicts from escalating. This role highlights his natural inclination towards maintaining harmony within his social circle. His ability to navigate the volatile dynamics between Vince's aggression and Hubert's calmness is a testament to his emotional intelligence and adaptability. He's not willing to let their friendship go because of Vince's explosiveness and radicality or because of Hubert's passiveness and uncaring attitude. I also think he uses humor as a sort of coping mechanism as well, to stand resiliently in the face of the adversity that he faces from his harsh socioeconomic and systemic problems. While Vince and Hubert are more likely to fall out because of their clashing philosophies, Said keeps a strong bond with both of them. The setting of La Haine, the Parisian suburb of Chanteloup-les-Vignes, is more than just a backdrop. It is a character in its own right. The film was shot in black and white, a choice that strips the world of its vibrancy and reinforces the bleakness of life in the banlieue. The concrete jungle of high-rise housing projects with their graffiti-covered walls and burned-out cars serves as a visual metaphor for the decay and abandonment felt by the residents. The banlieue is a place on the edge, both geographically and socially, isolated from the prosperity and culture of central Paris. It is a world unto itself where the usual rules of society seem not to apply and where the only law is survival. Also, the film being shot in black and white is emblematic of the philosophies of our characters, only seeing their situations one way or the other with no compromise. The narrative of La Haine takes place over 24 hours, beginning in the aftermath of a riot sparked by the police beating of Abdel Ichaha, a friend of Vince, Hubert and Said. Abdel's fate hangs over the film like a specter, his life in the balance as he lies comatose in the hospital. Vince, incensed by the injustice, vows that if Abdel dies, he will kill a cop in retaliation. The threat of violence looms large throughout the film, driving the tension as the characters wander through their day, encountering various people and situations that underscore the deep divisions in French society. A single gunshot is heard, and we zoom in right into the face of one of our protagonists, standing opposite a police station guarded by a swarm of officers. He leaves, but not before vandalizing one of their vans with his name and a not-so-friendly remark about the police. Said arrives at the block of Vince, hollering for him to come down. After one of Vince's siblings lets him inside their home, he goes to wake him up. After he wakes up, you can instantly see the chemistry between these two.
Oh Vince!
Oh ta gueule, Saïd.
Oh quoi ta gueule Saïd? Comment tu me parles, enculé? Parle-moi bien, je vais encore plus te mettre des chiffres dans ta
Vas-y,
gueule.
bouge de là, tu pues de la gueule.
Eh, tu veux flamber dès le matin? Allez vas-y, 1,
2,
2,
3.
t'as perdu.
Allez, ta soeur bâtard.
Eh comment tu parles? Vas-y, je lui fais un carton et tu viens flamber avec moi? Hein?
J'ai vu une vache.
T'as vu une quoi?
Une vache.
Briefly chatting with other members of Vince's household, they head out and make it over to a trashed and abandoned boxing gym. Hubert's gym had been destroyed and set on fire by the rioters and others inside the chaos of it all. Although he had worked 2 years to get this gym, he seemed calm and stoic when Said asks him about it, not even wanting to know or caring about who could have done it. Walking around the ghetto, Vince briefly brings into discussion another story about one of his friends being hit by a policeman with a bat while heavily glorifying the scene to his friends, further solidifying the fact that he is growing an obsession with self-righteousness, a sort of radical justice. I think this is a moment where the seeds are planted for the rest of the movie. Three head up to a gathering some of the members of the ghetto are having on a rooftop. After goofing around for a little bit with the guys there, Said sits down with some of them who are having a discussion, arguing about whether a certain handgun they saw a couple days ago was a 9mm or a Desert Eagle. Said gets interested and asks them what exactly they're talking about. According to them, a cop had lost his gun in the chaos of the riots, very perplexed by the thought of where it ended up or if someone had found it. They laugh it off though, not making too much of the scene. Mayor is seen at the foot of the building and 3 cops have even ascended to their hangout. They are told to leave the premises, but they persist, mocking and insulting the officers at every step of the way. Even Nordine, the mature representative of the people in the ghetto community, telling them that they won't leave. Unfortunately, it's Said, Vince and Hubert are kicked out by Nordine. Vince, Said and Hubert are sitting bored out of their minds in a park for children, just talking absolute nonsense when a news van approaches them, asking if they were in the riots, filming them from above. The scene is brilliantly shot this way to portray the perception society has on these low-income communities, filming them and attempting to question them like they're some sort of animals in a zoo, sort of circus attraction for the news anchors and people who get to watch on their TV from their nice apartment complexes in the well-developed parts of Paris. The woman doesn't ask for consent to film them, or doesn't even come near them, probably considering them as lower people or scum from what the cinematography of this shot tells us. They rightly tell her to piss off and head to the home of another person from their community. We are once again reminded of the ongoing chaos when we find out his car was burned down by the rioters. The 3 laugh it off, but Vince is once again reminded by the situation of Abdel when he sees him on the man's TV. They're sitting down in front of a different block this time when a car slowly stops next to them. Said jogs over and comes back to Vince and Hubert with a pocket knife in hand. The man in the car is revealed to be Abdel's brother who has a pump gun. Said insinuates that he's out for revenge. Hubert's expression and nod signals his disapproval of this, and he suggests going to the hospital to visit Abdel. However, Vince has something different in store for them.
Comment il est mortel en vérité, putain. Hubert, t'es ma race.
Il dépose sa merde.
Alors, qu'est-ce qu'ils vont faire?
Vas-y, arrête.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils vont faire?
Vas-y, on verra si Abdel il meurt.
Vas-y, à mon tour là.
Attends, tu veux buter un keuf?
Quoi, tu connais un autre moyen, toi, pour se faire respecter?
Va lui faire du bien, Abdel.
Abdel, je sais pas, mais à nous, ouais.
Vince gets in a heated verbal altercation with the cop guarding Abdel's room. Said persists and gets taken away by one of the cops, leaving Hubert and Vince with one of the cops that actually has a semblance of empathy and maturity for the people of the ghettos. Vince and the cop go back and forth about Abdel and ongoing injustice, while Hubert doesn't bother, adding a single but actually insightful comment to the conversation.
La majorité des flics dans la rue sont pas là pour vous taper, ils sont là pour vous protéger.
Ah ouais, qui nous protège de vous?
They're released and we can actually see Hubert sympathizing with the officer, Said being indifferent to him, and Vince not even wanting to shake his hand. Long story short, Vince reveals he had the gun on him all along. Hubert rightfully gets pissed off and leaves. Hubert heads back to his home and we get this beautiful overhead shot of the community. This is where we see the culture of the 90s and of the people living in these economically fresh communities. I think Kassovitz did a great job of humanizing the people, showing that they're not just a statistic or a number on a screen. These are real, actual people with their own families, problems, passions, talents, and dreams. Unfortunately, it's cut short. Abdel's brother is seen getting out of a car and taking shots at a policeman. He nails him in the arm, but their car breaks down. A tense altercation ensues, and more policemen swarm the scene. Vince, Hubert, and Said are present at the scene, and they are all sent scrambling when one of the cops alerts them that riot police is on their way. Vince and Hubert meet head to head with one of them, but when Vince pulls out his handgun, he freezes. He's in shock. He's never actually killed someone before. But Hubert manages to incapacitate the cop before he gathers any courage to do so. They flee, taking the bus. Vince reflecting on the situation, once again glorifying it like he wasn't shitting his pants just 30 seconds ago. Hubert is visibly irritated. Dade once again has to try and mediate between the two, but once again they get in a heated discussion. Vince wanting to tear down the system while Hubert being disgusted with his radicality. Furthermore, Vince swears that if Abdel were to die, he would murder a cop to get back at the system. While the two of them are bickering, an elderish man walks out of one of the bathroom stalls and starts telling a story out of the blue. He starts talking about his time traveling on a train headed for a Siberian war camp at a time around World War II. He introduces a man named Grunwalski that was with him during that time. During one of the stops, Grunwalski feels the urgent need to relieve himself. The train was only going to stop for a brief moment, so he quickly stepped off to find a secluded spot near the train tracks, since he didn't want to do it next to everyone else. In his haste, Grunwalski decided to pull down his pants completely, thinking it would be quicker. However, as he crashed down to relieve himself behind a bush, he suddenly heard the sound of the train's whistle indicating that it was about to depart. Funnily enough, Vince and Hubert have completely stopped going back and forth. Grunwalski found himself in an awkward situation. He couldn't decide whether to quickly pull up his pants and risk not catching a train or leave his pants down and run after it. Struggling with this decision, he wasted precious time. Each time the old man held out his hand to Grunwalski, would in turn hold out his hand. However, his pants would fall off. In the end, Grunwalski neither managed to pull up his pants nor catch the train. He was left behind, standing helplessly with his pants around his ankles as the train pulled away without him, subsequently freezing to death. The old man leaves. Anyway, there's a man named Asterix who owes Saeed some money. The man is clearly not in his right mind, having drugs all over his apartment. Well, it's not really his apartment, but additionally he has a gun. Long story short, Vince and Asterix get into a confrontation and are promptly kicked out, Saeed not even getting his money. Walking out this time, they are apprehended by 3 policemen, one of whom was in one of the bathroom stalls from earlier. Vince sees Hubert and Saeed getting arrested and tries to play it off before shoving one of the policemen that questioned him and darting it. Although Hubert and Vince were arguing mere seconds ago, when he gets asked if he knows Vince, he denies it. The cops that have detained Hubert and Saeed are clearly the ones that Vince assimilates with all cops. Power-tripping, arrogant and oppressive maniacs, physically abusing them and insulting them every step of the way. They're fortunately released after 2 hours of this though. We follow Vince after his escape more closely in these following scenes. He goes to watch a Muay Thai fight that was mentioned to him earlier before Abdel's brother was arrested. There isn't much meaningful dialogue in these scenes, just very raw and I guess symbolic. Seeing the people in the ring fighting as he sees him and Hubert going back and forth, or the police and the marginalized communities, at some point deciding that it's too much in a way when they start clinching. I think it's a cool nod as well that they added this, since Saeed and Vince's actors are enamored with martial arts. I also want to give a nod to one of the cinematic techniques used in this movie, putting our protagonists in wide shots, showing how small and insignificant they are to the rest of society, to the media, to the police, to the people who aren't living in the ghettos. They're like a small grain of sand, but for us, for the audience, they're people we've already connected with. Vince catches Hubert and Saeed on a train platform, trying to head back to the Banlieue. Alright, so I kinda had to cut this short because it's just a lot of meaningless filler. But basically they crash an art exposition, they steal someone's credit card, and they try jacking a car, which is to no avail. Oh yeah, and they almost get caught by the police. They go to hide on the roof of a building and subsequently get high. They bring up the old man from the bathroom earlier that told them about Grunwalski's story, trying to make some sense of it, but of course they're high out of their minds, so they're just saying stupid shit and laughing. They take off and arrive at a transport station or something like that, and then the bombshell drops. Vince has taken off. Bert and Saeed are sent frantically scrambling, calling out for him and darting off to find him. Vince points the gun at the nearest policeman he could find and... Thankfully, it was all within his head. Bert slapping him back to reality, waking him up from his destructive daydream. Saeed and Hubert are just sick of his antics now and leave him. However, they get ambushed by a gang of skinheads and a fight ensues. Vince thankfully gets his gun and holds one of them at gunpoint, the rest of their group leaving him behind. They drag him into an abandoned building and the pressure starts building. Hubert is in his ear telling him to waste him so that he can finally see that he isn't about that life. He clenches the gun. Vince's ego and identities just shatter after he meets the reality of the matter, but it seems as if he's finally redeemed now. They arrive back in the suburbs, Vince and Hubert shaking hands and finally making amends. He gives him the gun as he resigns his old identity and begins anew. Saeed and Vince take off and we seemingly have reached a satisfying ending.
Sans tes copains, tu flippes ta mère. Qu'est-ce que tu fais là? Tu flanques moi, hein? Qu'est-ce que tu fais là? Regarde-le là. Regarde.
C'est l'histoire d'une société qui tombe et qui, au fur et à mesure de sa chute, se répète sans cesse pour se rassurer. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. Jusqu'ici, tout va bien. L'important, c'est pas la chute. C'est l'atterrissage.
This is single-handedly the most gut-wrenching and sad ending to a film I've ever seen in my life. The first time I even watched this movie, I was left in shock, and for a couple of days I couldn't get it off my mind. Having watched it for a third or fourth time again, it still hits me like a truck. It's such a hard scene to get past that it almost made finishing the movie again impossible for me. But the interpretations that this ending leaves for the viewers suck just as much, if not more, than the ending itself. In the final scene, we hear the gunshot, but we don't know who shot. Therefore, we are left with two possible scenarios, each one of them equally terrifying. The policeman kills Hubert, and chaos ensues in the suburbs once again. The divide between the police and the people is only furthered, and the vicious cycle of the hatred continues. But this time it would be the total collapse of the society. With Vince, Hubert, and Abdel dead on the same day, the communities would tear everything down as we know it. What we have seen until now, the burning down of cars and buildings, lootings, the violence inflicted on the police, all of this was just over the beating of Abdel when he wasn't even dead. The violence continues. La haine atterrait la haine. This is the ending that a lot of us would wish for. We want to believe that Hubert shot the cop. The movie opens up with the beating of Abdel and how Vince is so angry and filled with hatred he wants to avenge him. But the audience doesn't know Abdel, so Vince's behavior just seems brutish and naive. The shooting of Vince at the end of the film mirrors Abdel's, only that we've got to know him and now we can relate to the same anger and hatred he felt at the start. It's basically putting a face and a story to these lives and making us complicit to these cycles of hatred and how they descend into violence. Because now, we, the audience, are the ones filled with hatred and hoping that Hubert shoots the cop, just as Vince wanted earlier in the movie. This ending is deliberately ambiguous, forcing the viewer to confront the horrifying uncertainty of violence. The cyclical nature of hatred, which has been a theme throughout the film, reaches its devastating conclusion here, ending where we began, zooming into Said's face, monologue of the man falling from the building. No matter who fired the final shot, the message is clear. In this world, violence begets violence, and no one escapes unscathed. The film ends as it began, with the metaphor of the man falling from a building. The fall is over, and the landing has arrived. But the true tragedy of La Haine is that the cycle of violence will continue long after the credits roll. At its core, La Haine is a meditation on the cyclical nature of hatred. The film's title, meaning hate, reflects the destructive emotions that drive the characters and their community. Vince's anger, Hubert's resignation, and Said's frustration are all products of a society that has systematically marginalized them. The film shows how hatred, whether it comes from the police, the media, or the characters themselves, leads only to more violence and more suffering. Throughout the film, Kassovitz explores how the cycle of hatred plays out on both a personal and societal level. Vince's desire to kill a cop, to avenge Abdel, mirrors the larger dynamics of the banlieue community, which feels under siege by the police and the state. But the film also shows how this hatred is self-perpetuating. It's a film about violence, yes, but it is also a film about the systems that create and sustain that violence. It shows us a world where hatred is passed down from generation to generation, where violence is not just an individual choice, but a societal condition. I mean, just look at the final moments. Said's final ties to normality and to a peaceful life are cut as we hear one final gunshot at the end. The film's characters are caught in a system they did not create, and yet they are forced to live with its consequences every day. Kassovitz's masterpiece remains one of the most important films of the late 20th century. La Haine has had a lasting impact on both French and global cinema. Its raw portrayal of police brutality, social inequality, and racial tension struck a chord with audiences around the world, particularly in countries grappling with similar issues. In France, the film sparked widespread debate about the treatment of immigrants and the role of the police in marginalized communities. It has become a cultural touchstone, often referenced in discussions about the state of the banlieues and the struggles faced by those living there. The film also had a significant influence on the future filmmakers, particularly those interested in exploring themes of race, class, and urban life. Its innovative use of cinematography and sound design set a new standard for social realism in cinema. Films like City of God and Gomorrah owe a debt to La Haine for their portrayal of violence and poverty in urban environments with such expertise, not just for its commentary on French society, but for its universal themes of alienation, identity, and the inescapable cycle of hatred. The film ends with a question mark, leaving the viewer to wonder not just about the fate of its characters, but about the fate of a society that allows such cycles of violence to continue. And as the final shot fades to black, we are left with the haunting echo of the film's opening metaphor. It's not about the fall, it's about the landing. But in a world where hate breeds hate, the question remains, will we ever stop falling?